It's wonderful to see you all again. I've got an extraordinary tale to tell you today.
Give me the keys, Lena Lee snapped, her hand outstretched across the white linen tablecloth as if demanding a toy from a child. You don't look like you belong in a car like this anyway. The bistro was crowded, the midday rush of the city's elite creating a low hum of conversation that died a sudden death at the tables surrounding them. Regina Lee didn't move. She sat perfectly still, her fingers curled around a glass of iced water. The cold condensation seeped into her skin, a sharp, biting contrast to the heat rising in her chest. "Lena, please," Regina said, her voice a low, steady anchor against her sister's rising tide. "I bought that SUV for my site visits. It's a company vehicle. I need it for the bridge project starting tomorrow." Lena let out a sharp, mocking laugh that drew the eyes of a nearby group of investors. She adjusted the strap of her designer handbag, the gold hardware catching the light. "A company vehicle? You're a construction specialist, Regina. You wear steel-toed boots and spend your days in the dirt. I have a brand collaboration shoot at the vineyard tomorrow. I can't show up in my old sedan. It'll ruin my aesthetic." She leaned forward, and the cloying, heavy scent of her expensive jasmine perfume washed over Regina. It was a suffocating smell, the kind that lingered in a room long after the person had left, claiming space it hadn't earned. "Regina, don't be so difficult," Lena Lee chimed in, her voice dripping with that practiced, weary disappointment she reserved only for her eldest daughter. The mother of the Lee family reached over, patting Lena's hand before casting a sharp look at Regina. "Your sister's career is at a delicate stage. One wrong post could cost her thousands. You're just going to a muddy construction site. Take the bus or call an Uber. Family helps each other." Regina looked at her mother, searching for a flicker of the fairness she'd been promised as a child. She found only the same blind devotion to Lena's superficial whims that had defined their lives for years. Beside them, Cousin Darren shifted uncomfortably, his eyes fixed firmly on his steak, while Evan Lee, the youngest, watched the exchange with a furrowed brow, his fork hovering midair. "The car is in my name, Mom," Regina said, the words tasting like ash. "The insurance, the payments, the maintenance, I pay for all of it. Lena hasn't touched a steering wheel without hitting a curb in 3 years. Lena's face contorted, the mask of the polished influencer slipping to reveal the entitled bully beneath. She stood up, her chair screeching against the marble floor. It was a sound like a serrated blade. "I'm not asking, Regina. I already told my followers I'd be driving it." "Do you want me to look like a liar? Is that what you want, to humiliate me?" "You're doing a fine job of that yourself," Regina replied calmly. The silence that followed was absolute. Lena's eyes widened, and for a moment the only sound was the rhythmic, frantic tapping of her acrylic nails against the mahogany table. Then, with a sudden, jerky movement, she reached for Regina's purse, which was draped over the back of her chair. "Hey!" Evan finally spoke up, but it was too late. Lena fished out the heavy key fob with the silver logo. She held it up like a trophy, a triumphant smirk tugging at her lips. "There, problem solved. I'll bring it back when I'm done. Maybe." "Lena, put those back," Regina said. She didn't shout, she didn't rise, she simply watched her sister. "Make me," Lena hissed, leaning in close so only Regina could hear the venom. "You've always been the boring one, the workhorse. You don't need nice things. You don't even know how to use them. Just stay in your lane and keep making the money that keeps this family comfortable. That's all you're good for." Alina nodded approvingly as Lena tucked the keys into her bag. "It's just for a few days, Regina. Stop being so selfish. Darren, tell her she's being dramatic." Darren looked up, his face reddening. "I mean, it is just a car, Regina. If Lena needs it for work." "Work," Regina repeated, the word a hollow echo. She looked at Daniel, who had just entered the restaurant and was standing a few feet away, taking in the scene with a grim expression. He was her lead foreman and her only real confidant. He saw the theft. He saw the betrayal. Regina's hand went to her pocket, where her fingers brushed against a small, rectangular device, her secondary phone, the one linked to the vehicle's internal security and GPS suite. She felt the weight of it, a secret power Lena couldn't possibly comprehend. Lena turned on her heel, her heels clicking a sharp, arrogant rhythm against the floor. "Don't wait up, sis. I might take the long way home." Elena sighed, picking up her wine glass. "Finally, some peace. Now, Darren, tell us more about that promotion." Regina sat in the wake of the jasmine perfume, the scent of it turning sour in her lungs. She didn't look at her mother. She didn't look at her cousins. She looked at Daniel, who gave her a single, slow nod. She pulled out her second phone. The screen glowed, showing the SUV's status, engine start, door closed. She watched the little blue dot on the map begin to move away from the restaurant. Lena thought she had won. She thought she had taken what she wanted because she was louder, prettier, and more loved. She didn't realize that the car wasn't just a vehicle anymore. It was a cage. Regina tapped a command on the screen, her face as cold and unyielding as the concrete she poured for a living. She had spent years building things for this family, homes, reputations, safety nets. Now she was going to enjoy watching one specific structure crumble. "Enjoy the drive, Lena," Regina whispered to the empty air. "It's the most expensive ride you'll ever take." She stood up, smoothed her blazer, and walked toward the exit without looking back at the table. The countdown had already begun. Regina stood in the shadows of the mezzanine, the scent of industrial sawdust and cold diesel clinging to her hair. Below, the workshop lights flickered on with a harsh, buzzing hum. It was barely 5 in the morning. She watched the security feed on her phone as the SUV, the one Lena Lee had effectively stolen at dinner the night before, backed into the loading bay. Lena stepped out, her stiletto heels clicking sharply against the polished concrete. She looked absurd in a white faux fur coat, clutching a designer latte like a scepter. Behind her, Devon hopped out of the driver's seat, glancing around with the shifty eyes of a man who knew he was trespassing, but lacked the spine to care. "Hurry up," Lena snapped, her voice echoing through the rafters. "I need the laser levels and the mahogany trim for the backdrop. My followers expect a certain aesthetic for the studio reveal, and Regina's just letting this stuff sit here." Devon grunted, reaching for a crate of precision tools. Each one was calibrated for the high-rise contracts Regina had spent a decade securing. They weren't toys, they were the backbone of her firm. Regina's phone vibrated in her pocket. It was Lena Lee. She answered, her voice a flat line of professional calm. "It's early, Mother." "Regina, don't use that tone with me," the older woman said, the familiar sound of practiced disappointment dripping through the speaker. "Lena told me you were being difficult about the workshop keys. She's trying to build a brand, Regina. As her sister, you should be providing the foundation, not acting like a gatekeeper. It's just some tools." "They aren't just tools, Mother. They're my livelihood. They're expensive, specialized equipment." "Oh, don't be dramatic. You've always been so obsessed with your work." "Lena has a gift for people. You have a gift for dirt. Just let her use what she needs. I told her it was fine. Family helps family, Regina. Try to be the bigger person for once." Regina watched on the screen as Devon knocked over a rack of blueprints, the heavy paper unrolling across the dusty floor. Lena didn't even glance back. She was busy taking a selfie in front of a 3-ton excavator. "I see," Regina said quietly. "If you've given her permission, then I suppose the responsibility is yours." She hung up before her mother could launch into a lecture. Below, Lena was pointing at a customized CNC machine. "Take that one too, Devon. It looks high-tech." "It'll make the studio look like I'm actually designing the furniture myself." "That's $80,000 of equipment, Lena," a voice called out from the darkness. Lena jumped, nearly dropping her phone. Regina walked down the metal stairs, her work boots thudding with a heavy, rhythmic finality. Daniel stepped out from the office behind her, his arms crossed, his expression as grim as a judge's. "Regina, God, you scared me," Lena said, recovering instantly. She smoothed her coat and tossed her hair, her eyes flitting toward the exit. "Mother said I could be here. We're just borrowing a few things for my new influencer hub. You're always complaining about how busy you are, so I figured you wouldn't even miss this stuff." "You're trespassing," Daniel said, his voice low and dangerous. Lena laughed, a high, grating sound. "Trespassing? In a family business? Don't be absurd. You're just the help, Daniel." "Regina, tell your little boyfriend to back off." Darren is coming by later to help us move the heavy stuff. He agrees that you're being totally selfish lately." Regina didn't argue. She didn't shout. She simply pulled out her second phone and tapped a series of commands. Across the workshop, the CNC machine's digital display turned a sharp, angry red. The SUV in the bay emitted a short, muffled honk, its doors locking with a heavy, mechanical thud. "What was that?" Lena demanded, her eyes narrowing. "A safety precaution," Regina replied. She looked at her sister, really looked at her. Lena's entitlement was a physical thing, a shroud that blinded her to the reality of the world Regina had built. "You want to build a brand, Lena? You want to show the world what a Lee can do?" "Exactly. And I'm going to do it at the Heritage Gala on Friday. Everyone who matters will be there. I'm the keynote influencer for the new development project." Regina felt a cold spark of irony. Lena didn't know. Her mother didn't know. Even Darren, who was currently being used as muscle, didn't know that the new development project was owned by a holding company, and Regina held the pen. "The Heritage Gala," Regina repeated, the words tasting like a promise. 3 days away. I'll be sure to be there." "You," Lena sneered, gesturing at Regina's work-stained trousers and the smudge of grease on her cheek. "They have a dress code, Regina." "It's for people who build legacies, not people who pour cement, but I guess you can watch from the kitchen." Lena turned to Devon. "Get the SUV started. We're leaving. This place smells like old metal anyway." Devon pulled the handle. The door didn't budge. He tried again, rattling the frame until the glass vibrated. "It's locked, Lena. The key fob isn't working." Regina turned and began walking back up the stairs. "The car stays here, Lena. It's registered to the firm. And since you've decided to borrow my tools, I've decided to borrow my property back." "You can't do this," Lena shrieked, her face turning a blotchy, furious red. "Mother, I'm calling Mother." Regina didn't look back. She reached the mezzanine and looked down at the two of them, trapped in the loading bay of the workshop they had tried to pillage. She tapped her tablet one last time, activating the silent alarm that would summon the private security team she paid for. 3 days, Lena," Regina whispered. "Enjoy the walk home." The night air was a sharp, biting blade against Regina Lee's face as she stepped out of the workshop's side exit. Behind her, the heavy steel doors remained pressurized and sealed, holding her sister and Devon in a high-tech purgatory of their own making. The silent alarm pulsed a rhythmic, crimson glow against the gravel of the lot, a visual heartbeat of the trap Regina had finally dared to spring. She didn't wait for the security team to arrive. She knew the protocol. They would hold the intruders until the morning or until she signed the release. For now, the silence was the most expensive thing she owned. She climbed into her own sedan, the engine turning over with a low, predatory hum that felt far more honest than the flashy SUV Lena had tried to commandeer. As she pulled onto the main road, the scent of industrial grease and ozone still clung to her skin, a lingering reminder of the workshop Lena had treated like a personal shopping mall. Her phone buzzed in the center console. The caller ID flashed a name that made Regina's grip tighten on the steering wheel. Elena Lee. She didn't answer. She knew the script by heart. Her mother would start with a soft, trembling sigh, move into a lecture about family unity, and end by demanding that Regina apologize for being difficult. Instead, Regina pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner 3 miles away. Daniel was already there, sitting in a corner booth with 2 steaming mugs of black coffee and a thick manila envelope that looked heavy enough to sink a ship. He looked up as she approached, his steady gaze offering the first bit of genuine warmth she'd felt all week. "You look like you just went 10 rounds with a wrecking ball," he said softly, pushing a cup toward her. "I just locked my sister in the loading bay," Regina replied, sliding into the booth. The vinyl seat creaked under her weight, the smell of burnt coffee and floor wax grounding her. She tried to strip the workshop. She actually brought Devon and a U-Haul. Daniel didn't look surprised. He simply tapped the envelope. "Well, this is going to make her night even worse. I finished the forensic audit on the family trust and the secondary accounts Darren was supposed to manage." Regina took a slow sip of the bitter coffee, letting the heat settle her nerves. "And It's not just tools and petty cash, Regina, Daniel said, his voice dropping to a low, serious register. Lena didn't just borrow from the firm. She's been using Darren's identity to co-sign high-interest personal loans. She's leveraged his inheritance to fund her influencer lifestyle. If these notes aren't paid by the end of the month, Darren loses his house, and the firm faces a federal tax lien. The rage that had been a dull simmer in Regina's chest suddenly spiked into a white-hot flame. She reached out, her fingers brushing the cool, textured paper of the audit. This wasn't just sibling rivalry or entitlement. This was a calculated, parasitic destruction of everyone around them. "She's going to let Darren take the fall," Regina whispered, the realization tasting like ash. "She's the one wearing the $5,000 boots, and he's the one who's going to be homeless." "Not if we use this," Daniel countered. "The bank records are undeniable. I have the IP addresses from the loan applications. They all trace back to Lena's apartment and her personal laptop. She wasn't even smart enough to use a VPN." Regina's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message from Lena. She must have found a signal in the loading bay. "You're dead, Regina," the message read. "Mother is already calling the board. I'm telling everyone you attacked us and locked us in here to cover up your own embezzlement. Enjoy your last night of freedom. I'm taking everything." Regina stared at the screen, a cold, hard smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. The sheer audacity of the projection was almost impressive. Lena was trapped in a room she had broken into, caught with stolen property in her hands, and her first instinct was still to play the victim and demand a crown. "She's doubling down," Regina said, sliding the phone across the table so Daniel could see. "She's going to tell the family I'm the one stealing." "Let her," Daniel said, his eyes glinting with a sharp, tactical edge. "The more she talks, the deeper the hole she digs. Arrogance is a hell of a blindfold." Regina flipped open the envelope, her eyes scanning the columns of numbers. There it was, the weapon she had been waiting for. A series of wire transfers from the firm's emergency reserved directly into a private account held by Devon. Over $80,000 moved in the last 3 months alone. "The 50th anniversary dinner is in 48 hours, Regina said, her voice turning as calm and cold as a winter tomb. "The whole family will be there, the board members, the investors. Lena wants to make a grand announcement about Lena taking over as brand ambassador for the construction firm." "A public stage," Daniel noted. "High stakes." "Lena loves an audience," Regina said, her thumb tracing the official seal on the audit. "It's only fair she has won when the truth comes out. She thinks she's the one holding the cards because Mother always folds for her. She thinks I'm the sleeping lion who will just keep taking the hits to keep the peace." She closed the folder with a sharp, final snap that echoed in the quiet diner. 48 hours, Daniel. I want every one of these documents digitized and ready for a remote presentation. If she wants to talk about embezzlement, we'll give her a front-row seat to the evidence." She stood up, the exhaustion replaced by a terrifying, focused clarity. She looked at her phone one last time. A voicemail had just arrived from her mother. "Regina, honey," Elena's voice sounded strained, performatively fragile. "I don't know what's gotten into you, but you need to let your sister out of that building right now. You're being so cruel. We're a family. Don't make me choose between my daughters because you won't like the outcome. Just apologize and we can move past this before the dinner." Regina deleted the message without a second thought. She didn't need to hear the rest. The choice had already been made years ago. 2 days, Regina whispered to the empty parking lot as she walked back to her car. The countdown had begun, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the explosion. She was the one holding the match. The living room of her childhood home smelled of stale lavender and aggressive denial. Regina Lee stood in the doorway, her hand still on the brass knob, looking at the ambush her mother had clumsily disguised as a casual coffee date. Lena Lee sat on the floral sofa, her posture rigid, hands clutching a porcelain teacup like a weapon. Beside her, Lena Lee sprawled across the armchair, scrolling through her phone with a bored detachment that didn't quite reach her eyes. The air conditioner hummed, a low, mechanical drone that failed to mask the tension thickening the air. "Sit down, Regina," Lena said, gesturing to the wooden chair opposite them, the uncomfortable one usually reserved for guests who weren't expected to stay long. "We need to settle this before the rehearsal dinner tomorrow. I won't have you pouting in the corner and ruining your sister's moment." Regina moved into the room but didn't sit. She noted the paperwork spread across the coffee table between the porcelain figurines, a non-disclosure agreement, a transfer of ownership form for the workshop equipment. They hadn't just planned an intervention, they had planned a robbery. "I'm not pouting," Regina said, her voice steady. She watched Lena finally look up, her eyes narrowing. "I'm preparing. Preparing to apologize, I hope," Lena snapped. She tossed her phone onto the cushion, the velvet dimpling under the weight. "Devin told me what you said to him, threatening my staff. It's pathetic, even for you. Do you know how embarrassing it is to explain to my investors that my own sister is sabotaging my launch?" "Investors," Regina repeated, the word tasting like dry ash. "Is that what we're calling Darren now, or did you find someone else to defraud?" Lena set her cup down with a sharp asterisk clink that shattered the room's artificial calm. "That is enough. This jealousy has to stop. Lena has built something incredible, and you are trying to tear it down because you can't handle her success. We are a family. Families support each other." She pushed the papers forward with a manicured finger. "Sign the transfer. Let Lena manage the assets since you're clearly too emotional to handle the business right now. It's for your own good." Regina looked at the documents. The audacity was almost impressive. They wanted her to sign over the very equipment Lena had already stolen, retroactively making the crime a gift. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. "And if I don't?" Regina asked softly. Lena laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. She stood up, smoothing the front of her silk blouse, a piece Regina knew cost more than the monthly lease on the workshop. "Then you're not welcome at the dinner, and I'll make sure everyone in this town knows you stole from me asterisk. I have the social reach, Regina, you have. What, a hammer and a bad attitude?" This was the moment. The off-ramp. Regina felt the weight of the recording device in her pocket, silently archiving every threat. She could stop this. She could show them the forensic accounting report sitting in her car, the one that traced every cent of the embezzlement. She could save them from the public humiliation waiting for them in 48 hours. "Are you sure you want to do this, Lena?" Regina asked, locking eyes with her sister. "Once I leave this house, there is no coming back. If there is anything you want to tell me, the truth about the accounts, the loans, the investors, tell me now. We can fix it quietly." For a second, silence stretched tight across the room. The clock on the mantel ticked, loud and rhythmic, counting down seconds that Lena would never get back. Lena sneered, stepping into Regina's personal space. She smelled of expensive vanilla perfume and unearned confidence. "The only truth is that you're a bitter, small person. Get out of my sight, and don't show up tomorrow unless you're ready to kneel." Regina looked at her mother. Lena turned her head away, focusing intently on the pattern of the rug, making her choice clear. "Okay," Regina said. She didn't shout. She didn't slam the door. She simply turned and walked out into the humid afternoon heat. She climbed into her sedan, her hands steady as she started the engine. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat, a text from Daniel. "Legal team is ready." The venue manager just confirmed the projector setup. Regina glanced back at the house one last time. They thought they had won. They thought they had bullied her into submission, unaware that they had just handed her the final piece of ammunition she needed. "One day," she whispered to the rearview mirror. The countdown wasn't a threat anymore. It was a promise. The crystal ballroom at the Grand Meridian Hotel smelled of aggressive lilies and old money. It was a scent Lena Lee had chosen personally, ordering 3 times the recommended amount of flowers just to prove she could. She stood near the entrance, a glass of champagne tilting dangerously in her hand as she critiqued the tie of a passing waiter. "Straighten it," she snapped, not bothering to lower her voice. "You look like you slept in a dumpster." The waiter flinched, murmuring an apology, but Lena had already turned away. She scanned the room, her eyes hungry for validation. This was her night. The launch of the New Horizons initiative, a vague, glossy venture funded entirely by the capital she had siphoned from the family trust and the workshop accounts. She adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist. It was heavy, cold, and entirely unpaid for. Elena Lee sat at table 2, picking at the gold-rimmed charger plate. Her mother looked smaller tonight, shrinking inside a dress that was too bright, too loud. Lena had bought it for her, insisting she wear it. It was a mark of ownership, not affection. Beside her, Evan Lee loosened his collar, his eyes darting toward the exit every few minutes. He knew too much, but he lacked the spine to do anything about it. "Stop fidgeting," Lena hissed, leaning down to whisper in her brother's ear. "You're ruining the aesthetic." "I just don't think she's coming," Evan muttered, taking a large gulp of his drink. "After yesterday, you told her to kneel." "Exactly." Lena straightened, flashing a practiced smile at a local councilman entering the room. "And she knows better than to show her face here unless she's ready to beg. Regina is a creature of habit, Evan. She builds things, I own things. That's the natural order." The heavy oak doors at the back of the hall groaned open. The chatter in the room didn't stop instantly, but it shifted. The pitch changed. A ripple of confusion moved from the back tables toward the front, like a wave pulling back before a tsunami. Regina Lee stepped onto the plush carpet. She wasn't wearing the sawdust-covered jeans or the oversized flannel shirts she lived in. She wore a charcoal suit, tailored so sharply it could have cut glass. Her hair was pulled back, exposing a face that held zero traces of the exhaustion she had worn for years. She didn't look like a mechanic. She looked like a CEO. Daniel walked beside her, carrying a slim leather briefcase. He didn't look at the guests. His eyes were locked on the tech booth situated on the mezzanine level above them. Lena froze. The champagne in her glass sloshed over the rim, staining her fingers sticky sweet. This wasn't the entrance of a defeated woman coming to apologize. This was an invasion. She marched toward them, her heels clicking a frantic rhythm on the marble border of the dance floor. "I didn't approve a +1 for you," Lena said, her voice pitched low but carrying the tremor of sudden insecurity. "And I certainly didn't invite you to parade around in a suit you can't afford." Regina stopped. She didn't step back. She didn't look down. She looked at the stain on Lena's hand. "Hello, Lena," Regina said. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. It lacked the rough edge of anger. It was smooth, polished, final. "Nice venue. Expensive." "It's exclusive," Lena corrected, stepping into Regina's personal space to block her path to the tables. "Which means you need to leave. Security is on my payroll tonight." "Is that right?" Regina glanced past her sister, locking eyes with cousin Darren, who was hovering near the buffet. He quickly looked down at his shoes. "I wouldn't worry about security. We aren't staying for dinner." "Then what are you doing here?" "I'm here for the presentation," Regina said. She gestured toward the massive projector screen lowered behind the stage. It was blank, a giant white canvas waiting for paint. "I heard you have quite the story to tell about where the money came from." Lena laughed, but the sound was brittle. "You think you can intimidate me? Here, look around, Regina. These are my people, my investors, my world. You fix engines. You don't belong in a room like this." "You say that a lot," Daniel said, speaking for the first time. He checked his watch. 3 minutes, Regina." Regina nodded. She finally looked at Lena, really looked at her with an expression that wasn't hate. It was pity. "Go on, Lena. Take the stage. Don't let me keep you from your moment." Regina sidestepped her sister and moved not to a table, but to the far wall, leaning against a pillar with casual grace. She crossed her arms. Daniel moved away, disappearing into the shadows near the kitchen access door. Lena stood alone in the center of the aisle. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Something was wrong. The air in the room felt too thin, charged with static. She looked at her mother, who was staring at Regina with wide, watery eyes. She looked at Evan, who was now gripping the table edge so hard his knuckles were white. "They're jealous," Lena told herself, forcing the panic down. "She's just trying to rattle me. She has nothing. I have the accounts. I have the deeds. I have the power." She signaled the AV technician in the booth. A thumbs up. The lights in the ballroom began to dim, casting the room into a hushed, intimate twilight. A spotlight snapped on, hitting the podium with blinding intensity. Lena composed her face into a mask of benevolent success. She walked to the stage, the spotlight catching the diamonds on her wrist, scattering fractured rainbows across the front row. She gripped the sides of the podium. The wood felt solid, real. "Welcome, everyone," Lena said, her voice amplified, booming from the speakers. "Thank you for joining us to celebrate a new chapter for the Lee family." From the back of the room, near the pillar, Regina didn't move. She simply reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She tapped the screen once. Above the crowd in the darkened tech booth, the green light on the main server blinked off. A red light blinked on. "Tonight," Lena continued, her confidence surging back with the sound of her own voice, "I want to share the truth about how we got here, the truth about legacy." She clicked the remote in her hand to advance the slide. Behind her, the projector hummed to life. The massive screen flickered, flooding the room with light. But the image that appeared wasn't the company logo Lena had paid a firm thousands to design. Regina slipped her phone back into her pocket and watched. The countdown was over. The spreadsheet loomed over the ballroom, 10 feet high and impossible to ignore. It wasn't a logo. It was a forensic accounting log, the rows highlighted in damning crimson. The room went so quiet that the hum of the projector's cooling fan sounded like a jet engine. Hundreds of eyes shifted from the screen to the woman in the spotlight. Lena stood frozen at the podium, her mouth slightly open, the confident smile of a CEO curdling into confusion. She turned slowly, her designer heels scraping against the stage floor to look at what everyone else was seeing. "You skipped the slide about overhead costs," Regina said. Her voice was calm, amplified by the speakers, filling every corner of the room. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. On the screen, the dates were clear. The amounts were staggering. Transfers from the company operating account to L. Lee personal. $50,000 for a vehicle lease. $12,000 for a wardrobe consultation. $8,000 for a spa retreat classified as team building. Lena blinked, the long lashes she'd spent an hour perfecting fluttering rapidly. The color drained from her face, leaving her complexion ashy beneath the bronzer. She looked like a statue cracking under its own weight. Her grip on the podium tightened until her knuckles turned white, the only thing keeping her upright. "Turn it off," Elena hissed from the front table. The older woman scrambled up, knocking over her champagne flute. The crystal shattered, a sharp, violent sound that made half the guests flinch. "Regina, stop this jealous nonsense immediately. You're ruining your sister's night." "I'm not doing anything, Mother," Regina replied, stepping out from the shadow of the pillar. She walked toward the stage, her movements steady, her breathing even. She held the remote like a weapon. "I'm just correcting the record. Lena said she built this company. The math says she bled it dry." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Mr. Henderson, the bank representative who had denied Regina a loan 3 years ago, pulled a pair of reading glasses from his pocket and squinted at the screen. He pulled out his phone, tapping furiously. "This is fake," Lena stammered into the microphone, her voice rising an octave, cracking with panic. "She forged it. Security, where is security?" "Security works for the building owner," Regina said, stopping at the foot of the stairs. Click. The slide changed. The spreadsheet vanished, replaced by a scanned legal document. It was a deed of trust, followed by a patent registration for the structural fabrication process Lena was claiming to launch tonight. The seal of the state was visible in the corner. The name on the owner line was clear, Regina Lee *. "You don't own the process," Regina said, her voice dropping to a register that vibrated in the floorboards. "You don't own the patents. You don't even own the lease on this warehouse." "I bought the building through a holding company 6 months ago." Lena stared at the document. Her chest heaved. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and sudden, catastrophic failure. She looked at her boyfriend, Devon, near the tech booth, but he was already backing away, disappearing into the shadows of the exit. "But," Lena whispered. The microphone caught it, broadcasting her smallness to the entire room. She looked down at Regina, her eyes wide, terrified, and wet. The arrogance that had defined her for years evaporated, leaving a hollow shell. "You work for me." "I never worked for you," Regina corrected. "I worked despite you." She looked at the crowd, meeting the gaze of the board members who had ignored her emails for years. They weren't ignoring her now. They looked hungry for explanations, their faces pale as they realized they had backed a fraud. "The launch is canceled," Regina announced. "However, the audit begins tomorrow morning at 8 sharp. Anyone listed on those transfer logs might want to call their lawyer tonight." She didn't wait for a response. She didn't wait for her mother to start screaming or for her sister to faint. Regina placed the remote gently on a cocktail table. The plastic clicked against the glass, a final period at the end of a long sentence. She turned her back on the stage. The silence held for 1 heartbeat, 2, 3, and then the room exploded into chaos behind her. She didn't look back. She walked toward the double doors, the cool night air waiting for her, tasting sweeter than any champagne. The rhythmic asterisk clack of Regina's boots against the polished marble of the lobby sounded like a countdown. It was 7:58 a.m. The air in the corporate headquarters smelled of industrial floor wax and the sharp, ozone-heavy scent of high-end printers working overtime. Beside her, Daniel walked in silence, his presence a steady anchor in the storm he knew was about to break. He didn't need to speak. The weight of the manila folder in his hand said enough. Regina Lee didn't look at the reception desk. She didn't need to. Her eyes were fixed on the glass-walled conference room to the left of the elevators, where 2 figures were already pacing like trapped animals. Lena Lee looked like a ghost of the influencer who had stood on the stage the night before. Her designer dress was wrinkled, her hair a bird's nest of frantic tugging, and her eyes were rimmed with a desperate, blotchy red. Beside her, Elena Lee sat stiffly, clutching a designer handbag that Regina had paid for 3 birthdays ago. The moment Regina pushed open the heavy glass door, the silence in the room shattered. "You've had your fun, Regina. Are you happy now?" Lena's voice was a jagged glass edge, shrill and trembling. She lunged forward, stopping only when Daniel stepped subtly into her path. "You humiliated us. You destroyed the launch. Do you have any idea what the investors are saying this morning?" Regina didn't blink. She moved to the head of the table, the seat Lena had occupied with such unearned arrogance for months. She pulled out the chair, the screech of wood against the floor punctuating the silence she forced upon them. "The investors aren't talking to you, Lena. They're talking to the district attorney's office. And as for the audit, it's already finished. You can't audit a family business without my consent," Elena interjected, her voice trembling with a mix of indignation and practiced grief. "Regina, look at your sister. She's a wreck. How can you be so cold? After everything we've been through, you're going to let some accountants tear this family apart over a few bookkeeping errors." "Bookkeeping errors?" Regina's laugh was short, sharp, and entirely devoid of humor. She reached into the folder Daniel held out and slid a single sheet of paper across the mahogany surface. "Theft is not an error, Mother. Neither is arson." The color drained from Lena's face so fast it was as if a plug had been pulled. Her jaw didn't just drop. It seemed to unhinge, her mouth hanging open in a silent, jagged O. The frantic, blotchy red that had consumed her neck during her screaming fit suddenly vanished, replaced by a gray, sickly pallor that made her look years older. Her eyes, usually sharp with calculated malice, went dull and unfocused, darting toward the exits as if looking for a hole in reality to crawl through. Her breath came in ragged, audible hitches, her chest heaving under the silk blouse she'd bought with the workshop's emergency fund. She reached for the table to steady herself, her fingers trembling so violently that she knocked over a crystal water glass. It shattered, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the small room. "What are you talking about?" Elena whispered, though she refused to look at the paper. "Devon spoke," Regina said, her voice dropping to a level that was deadlier than a shout. "He didn't want to go down for the industrial accident at the workshop. He gave the police the text messages, Lena. The ones where you told him exactly which blueprints to burn and which tools to move to your private storage before the fire broke out. Lena sank into a chair, her legs finally giving way. She looked small. For the first time in her life, the entitlement that had acted as her armor was stripped away, leaving nothing but a frightened, selfish girl who had finally run out of people to blame. "I did it for us," Lena wheezed, her voice barely a shadow of its former volume. "I needed the capital to make the brand global. You were holding us back with your craftsmanship and your slow timelines. I was going to pay it back." "With what? The money you were funneling into your personal offshore account." Regina stood up, her shadow falling long across her sister. "Cousin Darren is outside, by the way. He's with the forensic auditors. He's quite interested to know why his investment in the Lee expansion was actually used to pay off your credit card debt at the boutiques in Milan." Elena stood up, her face twisted in a mask of maternal agony. "Regina, please, we can settle this. Don't call the police. Think of the scandal. Think of my reputation." "Your reputation was built on the back of my labor, and you used it to shield a thief," Regina said, gathering her things. She looked at Evan, who had been standing silently by the door, his face a mask of quiet, somber realization. He didn't look at his mother or his sister. He looked at Regina, and for the first time there was no pity in his eyes, only respect. "The police are already in the lobby, Lena," Regina said, her voice echoing with a finality that brooked no argument. "They aren't here for an audit. They're here for a statement." Regina turned toward the door. She felt the weight of years of gaslighting, of being the difficult one, the unemotional one, finally falling away. It didn't feel like a victory in the way she had imagined. There was no cheering. There was only the clean, cold reality of justice. "Regina!" Lena screamed behind her, a desperate, guttural sound. "You're a monster. You're killing this family." Regina paused at the threshold. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to see the wreckage anymore. "No, Lena, I'm just finishing the job you started." She stepped out into the hallway, the cool air of the lobby hitting her face. The sound of heavy footsteps approached from the elevators, 3 officers in uniform, followed by a man in a dark suit holding a warrant. Regina met the lead officer's eyes and gave a single, professional nod toward the conference room. As she walked toward the exit, the glass doors sliding open to the bright, unforgiving light of the morning, she felt Daniel's hand on the small of her back. The city hummed with a different energy today. The workshop was gone, the brand was in ruins, and her family was a memory of smoke and mirrors. But as she stepped onto the sidewalk, Regina Lee realized she had never breathed easier. The lion wasn't sleeping anymore, and for the first time in her life, she didn't have to carry anyone else's weight. She walked forward, leaving the screaming and the sirens behind, her footsteps steady on the pavement. 6 months had passed since the flashing blue lights had mirrored the collapse of the Lee family legacy. The dust from the workshop's demolition had long since settled, replaced by the sterile, hopeful scent of fresh paint and expensive vellum in a high-rise office overlooking the river. Regina Lee stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her reflection caught in the glass. She looked different, not just the tailored charcoal suit or the way her hair was pinned back in a sharp, professional bob, but the stillness in her eyes. The frantic weight she had carried for years, the burden of being the family's invisible pillar, had vanished. The door to her private suite opened softly. Daniel walked in, carrying 2 cups of espresso. He didn't say anything at first, merely setting one on her mahogany desk. He had been the one to help her navigate the grueling months of depositions and the intricate process of launching her own firm, Regina Lee Architectural Design. "The city council approved the library contract," he said, his voice a steady anchor in the quiet room. "You're the lead architect, Regina." She turned, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. It was a victory one without the shadow of theft or the taint of family sabotage. "It feels strange," she admitted, taking the warm cup, "to have earned something and not have to hide it to keep the peace." "You don't have to hide anything anymore," he replied. The peace was expensive, however. The cost of her freedom was written in the legal documents filed in the bottom drawer of her desk. She had walked away from the family home, letting the bank seize it after Lena Lee had been unable to make the payments Lena had ignored. Her mother now lived in a small, one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, funded by a modest stipend Regina provided through an anonymous trust. Regina hadn't spoken to her since the day of the arrests. The silence was a physical thing, a vast canyon that no apology could bridge. A soft knock interrupted them. Evan Lee stepped into the room, looking older than his years. He had spent the last few months working as a junior site surveyor for a rival firm, a job Regina had quietly recommended him for after he had finally testified against Lena. He looked at his sister with a mixture of pride and lingering shame. "I saw her today," Evan said, his voice dropping. "At the courthouse. The sentencing was finalized." Regina tightened her grip on the espresso cup. "And 3 years, Regina, for the grand larceny and the fraud. Devon got 5 because of his prior record." He hesitated, looking out the window. She tried to scream at the judge. She told him he was ruining her life, that she was meant for bigger things. She still doesn't get it. She thinks it's a conspiracy, not a consequence. Regina felt a flicker of the old rage, but it died quickly, replaced by a hollow sort of pity. Lena Lee had spent her life chasing a spotlight that was never hers to claim, and now the only stage she had was a concrete cell. Later that evening, Regina drove herself through the city. She found herself pulling over near a strip mall in a neighborhood she used to avoid. Through the window of a quick-press dry cleaners, she saw a familiar figure. Lena was behind the counter, her once perfect manicure replaced by cracked skin and short, unpainted nails. She was struggling with a heavy industrial steam press, her face flushed and sweating under the harsh fluorescent lights. There were no cameras here, no filters to hide the exhaustion, and no audience to applaud her entitlement. A customer was shouting at her about a spotted silk tie, and Lena was bowing her head, taking the verbal abuse with a forced, trembling smile. She looked small. She looked common. Regina watched for a long minute. This was the proportional justice she had craved. The girl who had ruined Regina's hard-earned clothes and stolen her professional reputation was now spent pressing the garments of strangers for minimum wage. The power inversion was absolute. She put the car in gear and drove away, the neon flicker of the dry cleaner sign fading in her rearview mirror. She returned to her new penthouse, a space defined by clean lines and the absence of clutter. Daniel was on the balcony, the city lights reflecting in the glass of wine he held. Regina joined him, leaning against the railing. The air was cool, smelling of rain and the distant, metallic tang of the subway. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object. It was the original brass seal from her father's old workshop, the only thing she had salvaged before the bulldozers arrived. She ran her thumb over the engraved initials. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked softly. "I was thinking about what I lost," Regina said. She looked at the sprawling city, a landscape she was finally helping to shape on her own terms. "I lost a mother who never really saw me. I lost a sister who only saw me as a resource. I lost the house I grew up in." She turned the brass seal over in her hand, feeling its cold, uncompromising weight. "But I found the person they were trying to hide," she continued. She set the seal down on the stone ledge of the balcony. It was a relic of a past that no longer defined her. She looked out at the horizon, where the skeletal frames of new buildings rose against the dark sky. The lion was no longer sleeping, and for the first time, the silence of the night didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a beginning. She stepped back inside, leaving the ghosts of the Lee family brand behind in the dark, her footsteps echoing with the quiet, steady rhythm of a woman who finally owned her own life.
I hope you enjoyed this tale. Please subscribe to support the channel. Goodbye for now.